Eli Carter had lived in Willow Glen for nearly 7 years. He liked the neighborhood's wide sidewalks, the way the trees turned gold in October, and the silence that fell after 9 o'clock most nights. But most of all, he liked the creek. It wasn't much. Just a narrow stream that wound behind the houses on the east side of the neighborhood, cutting a gentle path between rows of fences. It flowed quietly, even in the summer months when the heat made everything else feel still. The creek wasn't on any map, and it wasn't exactly public land. It was just there. Part of the landscape, like the oak tree in the traffic circle or the hawks that circled overhead. Eli's backyard sloped slightly toward the creek, and on rainy days, he'd watch the water swell and pull leaves downstream. It reminded him of the place he'd grown up, somewhere quieter, slower, before life had turned into lawn maintenance and email chains. On weekends, he trimmed back the brush near the fence, kept the fallen branches clear. It wasn't his job, but no one else seemed to mind, and it felt good to do something with his hands. Then, one Thursday afternoon in early spring, a white envelope arrived in his mailbox. The HOA logo was printed neatly at the top. Beside a 2-page letter explained that the natural drainage corridor behind select homes would be undergoing an upgrade. Concrete lining would be installed to increase long-term stormwater efficiency and reduce maintenance requirements. Construction would begin in May. Eli read it twice. Then again, there was no mention of community discussion. No note asking for input. Just a clear statement. This is what's happening. He walked out to the back fence and stared at the creek. A few birds chirped from the tree line. The water moved gently, like always. He couldn't picture it under a layer of concrete. The next evening, he brought it up with his neighbor Ron, who was pulling weeds by the driveway. They're paving over the creek. Ron asked, confused. Seriously? Concrete channel, Eli said. They called it an upgrade. Ron frowned. But it's not even broken. That weekend, Eli went to the HOA website and searched for meeting notes. The most recent updates were brief, mostly about seasonal landscaping and a broken light at the front gate. He didn't see anything about the creek. On Monday, he emailed the board asking whether residents could review the plan. He got a short reply 2 days later. Thank you for your message. The project has already been reviewed and approved by the board in accordance with guidelines. Work will proceed as scheduled. That was it. Eli felt something tighten in his chest. It wasn't anger, not yet, but something close. He wasn't the type to argue at meetings or send long complaint letters. But the way this had been handled felt off. Quiet things like that creek shouldn't be paved over without conversation. The following week, orange flags appeared in the grass behind the fence. Spray paint marked the ground. A few surveyors walked the area with measuring tape. The creek continued to flow, unchanged, unaware. Eli started taking photos each morning just in case. Not dramatic ones, just the way the water moved after a light rain, the way the reeds bent in the breeze. He saved them in a folder on his phone called Before. He wasn't sure what he was planning yet. Maybe nothing. Maybe just holding on to something that was about to disappear. The construction signs went up 2 weeks later. Mall. Laminated notices staked into the grass behind the backyards on the east end of Willow Glen. They were easy to miss unless you were looking for them. Eli noticed right away. Drainage channel improvements beginning May 15th. Please keep clear of work zone. The signs were positioned right along the path of the creek, and they weren't temporary. A few days after they appeared, a crew came through and tied bright orange ribbon around several small trees near the bank. Eli stood in his yard with a cup of coffee, watching them move from lot to lot. They didn't stop to ask questions. They didn't knock on doors. They were just doing their job that evening. Eli emailed the HOA again this time, asking for any available plans or diagrams related to the project. He tried to keep his message polite. No accusations. No demands. Just curiosity. He got a PDF the next morning. It showed a concrete trench 3 feet wide, straight as a ruler running the length of the creek. The natural curve of the water. was gone, replaced with a rigid shape boxed in by retaining walls. The document described it as low maintenance and optimized for runoff velocity. Eli stared at it for a long time. It didn't look like something meant for a neighborhood. It looked like the kind of channel you'd see behind a warehouse. Or beneath a highway overpass. Efficient, maybe, but cold. Unnatural. Silent. That weekend, he brought a copy of the diagram to the monthly HOA meeting. Held in the small rec center at the edge of the neighborhood, he wasn't sure what he expected. Maybe a chance to ask questions. Maybe a few neighbors who felt the same. He arrived early and sat near the front. There were 12 folding chairs, half of them occupied. At the table were the familiar faces. Of the board, Alan, the HOA treasurer with a clipboard for every occasion. Dana, who handled community landscaping. And Darla, the board chair, who was always perfectly put together. Even on a Saturday morning, when the meeting opened to general comments, Eli raised his hand. "I have a question about the creek project," he said, holding up the plan. "I've looked through the diagram and I'm wondering why we're pouring concrete instead of improving the natural channel." Darla glanced at him briefly. "It's been thoroughly reviewed, Mr. Carter. The board approved it back in February. It's a long-term solution for erosion and storm management. It also reduces maintenance costs over time." "Understand," Eli said. "But was there any input from residents who live next to it? I mean, this is going to change a lot. It's not just concrete. It's removing something that's been there for decades." Alan jumped in, his tone steady. The project was discussed during the January and February meetings, which were open to all homeowners. No objections were submitted during that time. And we've received professional input from a drainage consultant. "Do we know who the consultant was?" Eli asked. Darla offered a measured smile. "The vendor was approved through our management company. We trust their recommendations." There was a pause long enough that Eli could feel the other eyes in the room shift toward him. Some looked curious. A few looked impatient. "I just think it might be worth pausing," he said, "to ask if this is really the best approach, or if there's a way to manage the creek without wiping it out." Darla nodded, but it was the kind of nod that ended a conversation, not one that invited more. "The project is already in motion. We appreciate your concern." Eli sat down, holding the folded plan in his lap. The meeting moved on to seasonal planting schedules and summer events. No one mentioned the creek again. Outside, the breeze carried the scent of wet grass. The creek flowed quietly in the distance, following its usual path for now. The construction started exactly on schedule. A team of workers arrived just after sunrise on a Monday. Pulling in with machines, safety cones, and long flatbed trailers carrying stacks of concrete panels. By noon, the gentle creek that had quietly wound through Willow Glen was already reduced to a strip of muddy trench. Trees and shrubs were cleared from the banks, and the curve of the channel had been dug into a rigid, unnatural shape. Eli stood by his back fence each day, watching as the new structure took form. The water, what little remained during the dry weeks, had been diverted into temporary pipes. Where there had once been a soft, meandering flow, there was now a slope of hard cement. Straight lines, angles, drains cut into both sides like surgical scars. Still, most neighbors didn't say much. The project was loud but temporary. And with summer approaching, many were more focused on vacations and backyard barbecues than construction. Besides, the HOA said it would be done by mid-June, and it was, right on time. The crew packed up, the final panels were sealed, and the concrete channel stood finished, gleaming pale gray under the sun. The signs came down. The orange ribbons disappeared. And the creek, or what was left of it, quietly resumed its flow down the center of a cement trough. Eli stopped watching. He knew what was coming next. By late August, the first storm rolled through. Not a major one, just a fast-moving summer system that brought steady rain for about an hour, enough to wet the streets and send the kids running inside. But when Eli stepped out onto his back patio afterward, something felt wrong. There was no sound, the creek used to gurgle with rainwater during storms, rising gently and flowing faster for a few hours before settling back. But now, the concrete structure held the water like a cold gutter. It didn't move, sat. He walked to the fence and looked down. A pool had formed in one section of the channel. The concrete was supposed to drain everything quickly, but the water had already collected debris, leaves, sticks, plastic wrappers, and was backing up near one of the pipe openings. That week, more rain came. Not heavy, but steady, sky, that soaked into the ground over time. Neighbors started noticing puddles in places they hadn't seen before. Along the sidewalk on Sycamore Court, water lingered at the curb long after the rain had stopped. A few homes with yards that sloped inward found small standing pools forming near their foundations. Eli wasn't surprised. The creek had handled all of that before. The soft earth absorbed the extra moisture, the natural curve slowed the flow, and the overflow followed the land's quiet rules. Now, everything was forced through a straight, narrow channel that didn't adjust or adapt. It just held on like a clogged pipe. The HOA sent out a short newsletter the following week. One paragraph mentioned the rain. During the recent weather, minor pooling was observed in a few low-lying areas. The new channel has performed within its expected range, and temporary water buildup is typical during seasonal transitions. Eli read it twice. Minor pooling, he muttered. He wasn't expecting alarm, but he wasn't expecting silence either. He took another walk through the neighborhood the next day. At several spots along the channel, he saw the same thing: shallow pools, blocked drains, water sitting longer than it used to. A few residents had already set out makeshift sandbags, just in case. One neighbor, an older man named Dennis, leaned over his fence when Eli walked past. "You think this is normal?" Dennis asked, nodding toward the pooling water. Eli gave a small shrug. "Depends on who you ask." They both stood in silence, listening to nothing. The old sound of flowing water was gone now, replaced by stillness. And the rain hadn't even gotten serious yet by late November. The skies turned gray and stayed that way. The rain came in waves, steady, cold, and relentless. What started as a few rainy days stretched into weeks. Front lawns stayed soaked. Tree roots poked up from waterlogged ground. Gutters overflowed. And the new concrete channel that replaced Willow Glen's old creek was already showing signs of stress. Eli kept watch from his back window. He didn't have to go far to notice the changes. The runoff, which the HOA promised would flow cleanly through the new design, now backed up near the midpoint of the channel. The water didn't move fast enough to stay clear. Mud and yard debris settled in the corners where the concrete met the earth. And a shallow layer of water sat stagnant long after each storm. By early December, the backups turned into small floods. At first, it was just in Eli's yard. Water crept up from the channel during one of the heavier rains, pooling at the fence line. Then his neighbor Ron called one evening to say his crawl space had taken on water. "They told me this was better," Ron said, his voice tight over the phone. "They told all of us. Round the corner on Willow Bend Street, things got worse." Several homes backed up to the same stretch of concrete channel during a particularly heavy downpour. Stormwater pushed back through a clogged drain and flooded 2 driveways, inching toward garage doors. One homeowner had to use towels and buckets to keep the water out. Another woke up to find his patio furniture floating. That week, the HOA sent out another email. This one was longer. "We are aware of recent drainage concerns related to extreme weather patterns. Temporary measures are being taken, including contracted vacuum services and manual clearing of blockages. Please keep storm grates clear of leaves and report any pooling that lasts more than 24 hours. Eli read it twice, said a lot but didn't actually say much. He'd already seen the temporary crew come through with a small truck to clear debris. They'd been out there twice in 2 weeks. The fix never lasted more than a day. By New Year's, the situation had changed from inconvenient to damaging. Several roads near the eastern part of the neighborhood developed soft spots where water had seeped beneath the surface. Sidewalks tilted slightly, their edges cracked. A few lawns remained underwater for days at a time. The soil, saturated and compacted, had nowhere to send the water. The worst came in mid-January, when a storm cell stalled over the region for nearly 24 hours. Inches of rain fell in a single night. Willow Glen wasn't ready. The underground pipe network overflowed. The concrete channel backed up from both ends. Water spilled into backyards, seeped into basements, and pushed up through street drains. On Sycamore Lane, 2 cars had to be towed after stalling out in standing water. Eli stayed up most of that night, watching from his window as neighbors moved sandbags, tried to reroute water with shovels, and knocked on each other's doors. Flashlights darted through the dark like signals. The next morning, the HOA sent another message, this one brief and sobering, due to the recent extreme rainfall. Significant drainage failures have occurred in several areas. Emergency assessments are underway. It didn't mention the concrete channel by name, but by now everyone knew where the water should have gone. And everyone knew what used to carry it away before the change. Eli stepped outside and walked to the back fence. The concrete channel was buried under murky water and broken branches. It no longer looked like a solution. It looked like a warning. The creek, it seemed, had always known how to manage the rain. The concrete never had a chance. The emergency meeting was held in the community clubhouse on a damp Thursday evening. The parking lot was full 20 minutes before the meeting even started. Folding chairs had to be brought in from the storage room, and still, some residents stood along the walls. It was the largest turnout anyone could remember for an HOA meeting. Eli sat near the back this time, notebook in hand. He wasn't there to argue. He just wanted to hear what they had to say. After weeks of waterlogged lawns, cracked sidewalks, and temporary fixes that solved nothing, people were ready for answers. At the front of the room, the board sat behind a long plastic table. Darla, the HOA chair, looked unusually tense. Blazer was neatly pressed, but her expression was not as calm as usual. Alan, the treasurer, shuffled papers beside her after a few opening remarks. Alan stood. First, we want to acknowledge the challenges the community has faced over the past 2 months, he began, his voice steady. The recent series of storms revealed vulnerabilities in our stormwater infrastructure that were not anticipated. He glanced down at a spreadsheet, then back at the crowd. As of last week, we've spent just over $300,000 on emergency response efforts. A few gasps broke the silence. Eli didn't react outwardly, but inside the number hit hard. $300,000. That was more than the HOA's annual operating budget, Alan continued. These costs include road repairs, temporary, pumping, landscape restoration, and consulting fees. Unfortunately, some of these damages fall outside our reserve plan. We'll need to discuss options moving forward, including special assessments. Now the room stirred. Words like special assessments didn't sit well. Eli saw a woman 2 rows ahead whisper something sharp to her husband. Someone near the door muttered under their breath. Darla leaned forward, trying to regain the room. We understand this is unexpected, and we want to be transparent. The project to reinforce the channel was intended to protect the neighborhood. In the long term, we relied on professional guidance, and all decisions were made with safety in mind. A man stood up from the second row. His name was Jeff, and he owned one of the homes on Willow Bend that had taken on water during the worst of the flooding. Why didn't anyone question the plan before we poured concrete into a natural creek? He asked, voice clear and calm. That stream handled rain for decades. This winter wasn't unusual, it was just rain. And now we're paying the price. Darla paused. We did consult with experts. Which experts? Jeff asked. Who exactly approved the drainage model? Alan looked uncomfortable. Flipping through his papers again, Eli stood up slowly. There was no community discussion, he said quietly. It was already decided by the time most of us even knew about it. Some of us asked questions, but the answers were always the same. It was being handled. It would be better. He held up a photo from his phone. It showed the flooded sidewalk outside his backyard. It's a concrete channel completely submerged. This isn't better, he said. It's worse. And now everyone here is paying for a decision we didn't get to help make. Silence followed. No one rushed to defend the project. Finally, Darla sighed and folded her hands. The board will consider all feedback moving forward, she said. We'll be scheduling a series of workshops to review options for long-term restoration. We know trust has been impacted, and we're committed to rebuilding it. As the meeting adjourned, people didn't leave right away. They stayed in small groups, talking quietly, sharing their stories. Something had shifted, not just because of the money, but because of what it revealed. Eli walked home through the damp streets, the air still heavy with rain. $300,000. And none of it had restored what the creek once did for free. It started with a flyer, just a single sheet of paper taped to a few mailbox stands and community signposts. No dramatic headlines, just a question in bold type. What really happened to the creek and what can we do now? Below it was a date, a time, and the address of a neighbor's garage. Eli recognized the name at the bottom. Marcia Lynn. She lived on Sycamore Lane. One of the homes hit hardest during the January flood. She wasn't the kind of person who usually made noise. In fact, most people only knew her as the neighbor with the flower boxes and wind chimes. But that Saturday afternoon, nearly 24 people showed up at her garage. Folding chairs were pulled from sheds, coffee was poured into mismatched mugs. And someone brought a box of donuts. Eli came mostly to listen. Marcia stood at the front, holding a binder thick with printed documents, emails, diagrams, photos from before and after the concrete channel was installed. I'm not trying to stir anything up, she said, but I've spent the last few weeks reading through the HOA meeting archives. There was no public vote on the channel. There were no detailed engineering reports shared with residents. And the stormwater consultant. It was a one-person firm hired through a landscaping contractor, at a hydrologist. The room went quiet. She flipped to another page. This wasn't just a missed detail. It was a rushed decision that ignored basic environmental planning. Raised his hand. Can we fix it? I don't know yet, she said. But I think the first step is making sure this doesn't happen again. Eli spoke up. Then maybe it's time we start asking who gets to decide everything for us. That question sparked something. Within a few days, a group chat was formed. Volunteers gathered to canvass the neighborhood and hand out informational packets. People who had never said more than a polite hello at the mailbox were now exchanging photos of water damage, old creek maps, and questions about how HOA elections really worked. The momentum surprised even Eli at the next official HOA meeting. The board found themselves facing a full room again, but this time, the crowd wasn't just listening. They had questions. Clear ones, calm ones. And they wanted answers. How are outside contractors vetted? Why weren't we notified before the budget for the concrete project was approved? Can we form a committee to review flood prevention strategies going forward? Darla did her best to keep things orderly, but it was clear the tone had changed. People weren't angry. They were focused, prepared. Eli noticed that even some longtime board supporters seemed unsure now, shifting in their chairs as neighbors spoke. Then Marcia stood and made a motion, a request to create a resident-led advisory committee focused on drainage, infrastructure, environmental impact, open to any homeowner willing to volunteer time and research, to everyone's surprise. The board voted in favor. It wasn't an admission of guilt, but it was a start. And for the first time since the concrete went in, there was a sense that change might actually be possible from the ground up. Not the top down. Eli left the meeting feeling something different than frustration. He wasn't sure it was hope not. Yet, but it was something close. The quiet energy dot. He passed the old creek on the way home. The water still moved, but it was hidden, its rhythm muted beneath concrete and runoff. Still, it was there, waiting. Just like the people who had once taken it for granted, and now they were watching. By early spring, the advisory committee had taken shape. It started with 7 residents, including Eli, Marcia, and Ron. They met in garages, at picnic tables in the park, and sometimes even in the empty clubhouse when the board wasn't using it. They didn't wear badges or carry titles. They just asked questions, read city planning codes, and spoke with professionals who understood how water should move through land. Like Willow Glen. What they discovered wasn't shocking, but it was sobering. The original creek had been part of a low-impact watershed design decades earlier. It had never needed concrete because the natural slope, native plants, soil composition had been doing the work all along. Water moved gradually, filtered through layers of root systems, and rarely overwhelmed the land. The concrete structure, on the other hand, had been built for speed, not absorption. It turned a slow-moving stream into a rush of runoff too fast, too soak in, too narrow to breathe. And when that fast-moving water met a bottleneck or a clogged drain, simply stopped and spilled over. The committee presented their findings to the HOA board in a calm, well-prepared proposal. Their recommendation wasn't radical. Don't tear out the entire system, but pilot a restoration of one key section of the old creek bed behind Willow Bend Street, the neighborhood's most flood-prone area. The idea was simple. Remove the concrete, rebuild a natural channel using native vegetation, and allow water to slow, settle, and spread again. To their surprise, the board didn't resist. In fact, one member had started attending the committee's meetings. He admitted that the costs from the winter flooding had changed his perspective. "Numbers don't argue," he'd said quietly after one of their sessions. What worked before may have been more natural, but it was also smarter. By mid-April, the board voted to approve the pilot project. Local engineers and environmental planners volunteered time to help shape the new layout. The restoration team marked this section for removal, and neighbors gathered one sunny weekend to begin the work. Volunteers hauled out broken concrete slabs, dug shallow curves into the soil, and laid down layers of stone and mulch to prevent erosion. Native plants, grasses, sedges, and a few saplings were planted along the banks. Children carried watering cans back and forth, laughing as their shoes got muddy. Someone brought a speaker, and music played softly as shovels moved and gloves dirtied. Eli worked beside Ron near the far end of the creek. They paused now and then, not because they were tired, but because they kept looking around. This wasn't just a repair. It was something more. Something personal. "This almost feels like the neighborhood I moved into," Ron said. Ailey nodded. "It's starting to remember itself." Within weeks, the new channels softened under the spring rains. Where water once sped through concrete, it now trickled through earth. It paused in shallow pockets, nourished the soil, and disappeared beneath. The roots of plants that were meant to be there. Birds returned, so did dragonflies. The advisory committee continued to meet, not just to watch over the restoration, but to help guide the neighborhood forward. The board, now more open to collaboration, welcomed the input. And at the next HOA election, several committee members were nominated for open seats, not out of protest, but out of trust. Eli never imagined he'd become involved in something like this. But now, as he stood one evening at the edge of the restored creek bed listening to the soft burble of water over stone, he felt something close to peace. The land hadn't been loud about what it needed. It never asked for anything, really. It just waited quietly, patiently for someone to remember how it used to work. And now, at last, someone had. The restored creek was no longer hidden. A few months after the pilot project, word spread through Willow Glen. People stopped walking past without noticing the gentle waterway that now curved naturally behind the houses on Willow Bend Street. Children ran along its banks, skipping stones and watching minnows dart beneath the surface. Gardeners planted wildflowers nearby. And birdsong filled the air with a soft soundtrack to the peaceful mornings. Eli often found himself there in the early hours, cup of coffee in hand, watching the way sunlight danced on the water. He'd lived in Willow Glen for over a decade, but had never felt quite so connected to the land as he did now. The HOA meetings had changed, too. They were no longer tense gatherings filled with frustration or silent resignation. They had become forums for discussion. Places where residents shared ideas and concerns openly and where the board listened. Marcia, now an elected member of the board, had helped craft new policies focused on environmental stewardship and transparency. The advisory committee was formalized as a permanent neighborhood task force, ensuring the creek and drainage systems were cared for not only as infrastructure, but as vital parts of the community's well-being. Eli recalled the winter that had tested Willow Glen, the months when relentless rain revealed the cost of decisions made without full understanding. The sealed creek, the flooded roads, the $300,000 price tag, they had all been difficult lessons. But those challenges had sparked something else, a renewed commitment to listen to the land and to each other. On a warm summer evening, Eli stood at the creek's edge as families gathered nearby for a small block party organized by the task force. Laughter and music floated through the air. Children splashed in shallow pools, while adults chatted about garden plans and summer plans. Darla, the former HOA chair who had led the original concrete project, approached Eli. She smiled with a hint of humility. "I wasn't sure how this would all turn out," she said. "But seeing the creek like this reminds me why we're here, to protect this place, together." Eli nodded. "Sometimes it takes a hard lesson to get there." Glanced at the water, then back at the gathering neighbors. "It's a sound I hadn't heard in a long time," she said quietly. "The sound of the past flowing into the promise of the future." The water whispered over stones, weaving through roots and rocks, carrying stories older than any of them. Stories of rain and earth, of quiet resilience and steady change. For Willow Glen, the future wasn't about concrete fixes or quick answers. It was about returning to what had always worked, listening, adapting, and respecting the natural rhythm beneath their feet. As the sun dipped low, casting a golden glow over the creek, Eli felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for the water, but for the people who had chosen to care for it, who had chosen to care for each other. The neighborhood wasn't perfect. There would be more storms, more questions, and more challenges ahead. But for the first time in years, there was also a quiet confidence born from community, from understanding, and from the gentle flow of a creek that had finally found its voice again.